This Quiet Earth by Michel Weatherall. Off of Thin Places. Yesterverse 2.0. Unknown, circa 2020. The sun had been eradicated by that insanity Azathoth. The world had changed, been transformed, broken. Bathed in the ultraviolet light of that Daemon Sultan, the star-sized god that had taken residence where our star once ruled. What little remained bowed to the Daemon Sultan. Ghosts, whispering memories. It had left the world dark and silent, bathed in its eerie ultraviolet glow. Motionless, not even the dead oceans dared disturb the god's decree of stillness. With the moon long since consumed, there were no tides, no waves, placid and silent. Her psychic abilities allowed her to manipulate her sight and to see into the ultraviolet spectrum. There was no choice. There was no other spectrum to see. Evolve or die, as all humanity had. Her red robes appeared dark gray with varying shadows of black. Color no longer existed. She dared disturb this god's still world as she walked across the barren wasteland, a desert of ash, dust, and ground bone. As the column of dust rose higher and higher in the decimated atmosphere, no wind, no breeze disturbed it. The wind had died along with Mother Earth. The Master could sense the breach. It hadn't arrived yet. Its pulsating tachyon particles created ripples in the time stream. She had pursued it for nearly a year, impossible to ignore. The Zaquian voice was an ever-present haunting whisper. The reformed atmosphere abolished weather. Rain simply ceased to exist. With the destruction of the moon, the oceans, tideless, were silent and placid, becoming ever more saline. Fresh water just ceased to circulate. After the great old one's reclamation, precious little fresh water remained. A desiccated, bone-dry world. It fed on a corpse, tearing its flesh, slopping at its drink. Maybe it was mutated by the daemon god's psychotons. It was full, but it fed and drank, bloating itself. It didn't know when it would get its next meal, or if it would get a next drink. Something scurried across the littered street behind it, small, diminutive. A child. The ghoul heard, but couldn't be bothered, bloated to its blood saturation point. Not all had adapted or evolved. With the strange ultraviolet light and psychotons that radiated from the Azathoth star, bombarding the devastated planet, killing and mutating at random. On a world of perpetual darkness, the irony of night fell upon few. Only when the living daemon star set did its ultraviolet light extinguish. Only in the darkness of night could these others see by starlight. Only the tiniest remained, possibly because of their need for because their need for water was less, possibly because they survived the horrors by simply not knowing any other world. The ghoul, its gluttony satisfied, stumbled off. The child ran to the carcass, carefully eyeing the ghoul. She fell to her knees and greedily slurped at the pooled blood mud that had coagulated beneath the ripped and torn corpse. She couldn't have been more than 3 years old. Tiny, wild, unkept. As her eyes remained locked on the ghoul, another set of luminous eyes watched her from the shadows. To a beta ghoul feeding off the slaughtered remains of others, this child was a bonus. It launched itself from the shadows, its long, sinewy arms and legs galloping, a trail of saliva trailing its hungry mouth. It was a world of horror. silence its golden rule. The predator's only sound was its labored breath as it sprinted. The feral toddler issued only rough, scraping sounds as she attempted to escape and scamper across the broken road. Darkness. Silence. These were the new laws decreed by Azathoth. Only the will of a god could break this new world's rules. The energy was blinding white. The broken bones and cooked remains of the running ghoul were lost in the blistering explosion, its carcass raining across the derelict street for the briefest moment. There was color, something the child had rarely witnessed. She froze, a combination of wonder, awe, and shock keeping her attention. Farther down the street, the bloated ghoul turned. A secondary light whitewashed it away. The explosion's concussion shattering the decrepit buildings of the neighborhood. The child scanned all directions, confused, frightened. A lone figure walked down the street, hooded and robed in red. Although the child knew no language, she knew red. It was her favorite color. It was the color of food, the color of drink. A long braid of iron-gray hair fell out of the stranger's cowl as she knelt and extended a cupped hand to the child. Water condensed and filled her palm as she offered it to the child.
Shh. I mean you no harm.
The master spoke. Her words were meaningless, but her telepathy transcended language. The little girl ran, clasping her hands, and drank. Tamara brushed her matted hair with her other hand.
Shh.
She soothed.
You're safe now.
Her aquakinesis squeezed from the surrounding air what little moisture remained, quenching the child's thirst. As the child continued to drink, the master scanned her surroundings. The ghouls weren't a threat to her, however. There were other things that roamed the wastelands. Monsters that could stand toe-to-toe with her. Monsters that heard the Zaquian's temporal displacement's whispering call. Monsters that were, in all likelihood, following her same path. She turned her attention back to the child. The toddler looked up with large green eyes, water dribbling across her cheek and chin. Tamara gently cupped the child's face, brushing the water off her cheek with her thumb. She exclaimed in a mock surprise.
Oh, look what I've done. I've made a clean spot.
Tamara wiped her face with her robe sleeve.
There. All pretty.
She smiled at the child. There was still beauty left in this world, buried and hidden, but present, nevertheless.
What are we going to call you?
The master's speech was telepathic, relaying more than simple words ever could. The child climbed onto her arms, sitting on her lap.
You are this world's hope.
She spoke to the child.
I'll name you Nozomi.
All they could smell was rust and dried oil. They sat in the twisted wreckage of some long-forgotten warship. It wasn't beached, for beached required a body of water. The derelict was surrounded by a nighted sea of bone-dry and cracked ocean bed. In the sheltered darkness, as they had done every night since they began this journey towards the breach, Tamara continued teaching Nozomi to speak.
By myself, but not alone.
She spoke slowly, enunciating her syllables.
By myself, but not alone.
Nozomi repeated.
Good.
Tamara smiled at her progress. Nozomi reached out her hand. Fingers splayed. Tamara carefully placed her hand palm to palm, their fingertips touching. It made Tamara melancholic. Old memories of her own mother billowing from deep within. They too have done this, just as her adopted daughter was now.
Never alone.
Tamara whispered in dysphoric darkness.
By myself, but not alone. Never alone.
Nozomi repeated. For days the horizon had glowed, like the gossamer of the cities of old. The master didn't know how long Nozomi and her had traveled. She didn't care. It didn't matter. Time belonged to the old world, to the lost world. Strange, too, were the ghouls that pursued them, slow and deliberate, always at a distance, almost like a unified mind, controlled. As they approached the coast, Tamara was surprised to see the abandoned refuse of a circus, pristine in its dilapidation. No wind stirred or dared disturb the silence. No rain to rot the carnival tents. No airborne water to rust its long abandoned rides and Ferris wheel. Like an ancient Polaroid snapshot, frozen in time. The ghouls spread out, always at a distance, seemingly at the ready. Nozomi was uneasy as she took Tamara's hand. The entire place radiated with a faint light, a luminescence of a sort unlike anything they had encountered before. Tamara knew this was the source of the breach. She could sense in her very bones the psychotons and tachyons emanating from this place. She could also sense the thing that waited on her. It must have been controlling the ghouls that staggered around the circus grounds, waiting.
Hide.
She bent down, gently kissing Naomi's forehead.
Follow me in the shadows. Remain close, but hidden. There's great danger here,
the master whispered. The child never questioned her. Releasing her hand, she simply slipped into the shadows. Tamara walked cautiously through the rows of carnival tents, her mind attentive, listening to something she instinctively knew she could never hear, that would never allow itself to be heard. The gaunt ghouls meandered in adjacent avenues, waiting. Reaching out her incredible psychic abilities to mask and conceal her adopted daughter, shielding her from the dangers that surrounded them. The abandoned circus sprawled out, seemingly in a maddening randomness, thinning as she approached the coast through artificial avenues. The passively pursuing ghouls were legion as they stood by the waterside and waited. The ocean spread out to cover the horizon, replacing the homogenized forest of circus tents with a never-ending blanket of ocean. A smooth, still, silent ocean, with no moon to disturb it, no waves, no gentle hushing sound issued forth, just a hauntingly silent ocean. A lone pier jutted into the ocean, ending in a deck-like platform. Its wooden pillars, bleached white from the saline waters, were coated with dead and extinct barnacles. It looked like it stood upon a mirror. Tamara's eyes followed it to its end, and the man that stood there. He turned to face her and smiled. It was the most inhuman thing she had witnessed. He was out of place in this world, dressed in a paisley-patterned black-on-black Armani suit. He sported a black tie and a flawless Windsor knot. His shirt was clearly pressed, so white as to nearly glow in the darkened gloom. He smiled. He was handsome, a simply beautiful man. His hair, dark and combed, was swept back in a boyish wildness. His eyes were large and attractive, yet squinted when he grinned. He smiled with his entire face, yet somehow didn't smile at all. "I've been waiting for you, Tamara," he greeted. "I knew you would see the breach."
Pharaoh Narlathatep,
she breathed slowly, about to say more as the man cut her off. "Oh, come now," he mockingly scolded her. "No need for formalities. We've met before. Still a product of your humanity." The sharp-dressed man seemed to be speaking to himself rather than with her. Still cannot see time for the disjointed chaos it is.
You have hidden behind 1,000 faces.
Tamara cocked her head to one side inquisitively.
You no longer even attempt to hide.
Why should I? He smiled again, his lips parting like the curtains of a great thespian act, revealing flawless, pearly white teeth. This is my world. His expression changed, seemingly attempting to show sorrow or an apologetic countenance. Yours fell. The power in Tamara's eyes scintillated, revealing her volatile emotions.
You destroyed my world, this world,
she said, extending her hand, indicating their surroundings. Faint energy arced off her fingertips. Temper, temper. He waved his finger at her. His smile spread wider still as he tapped his finger on the side of his nose. But you saved them. You found a way, didn't you? And now you hear their call, the Zaquaian's call through the breach, an escape hatch.
None of your kind exists there.
Tamara chose her words carefully.
My humanity is safe.
Why do you search for the Zaquaians? Why are you still searching for their escape hatch? You say your humanity is safe. Are they? Are they really? Then why do you come? Why do you search for the breach? They can't be safe. They can't all be safe. You believe I am not aware of a multiverse? The man's expression was a poor imitation of shock. Do you truly delude yourself into false sense of security? I have witnessed world upon world fall and die. I have brought doom to countless peoples, as you will too, sister. Tamara's expression betrayed her shock. Oh, yes. He seemed to be enjoying this. You and I are cut from the same fabric, scions of Azathoth. He motioned, gently waving a hand to the dark sky.
I am nothing like you.
Her teeth ground, spitting out the final word. We are nothing more than sentient force of nature. He began to snicker. Entropy is the universe's guiding rule. All fall apart. All decay. All originates in chaos, and all returns to that chaos. We bring destruction, genocide, and extinction. He ended laughing, seeing a humor that evaded Tamara. The irony is that all intelligence and civilizations cannot see this.
And you all the willing to accelerate it.
Tamara's voice boomed. He leaned forward as he whispered, As too will you.
Never!
Tamara bellowed, an invisible concussion wave emanating from her, its faint trickle causing ripples across the unblemished surface of the ocean. Oh! The man smiled, his smile extinguished as he watched the tiny waves. Tread cautiously, he warned softly, slowly, his voice hypnotic. You walk in my world now, my dear child, but you no longer belong. Only by my grace do you find your existence? You, like your oh-so-beloved humanity, will quietly fade into the night," he said, his voice seemingly empathetic. The silence was prolonged, uncomfortable. Not an absence of sound, but the presence of something tangible. This supernatural silence was cogent, somehow alive.
"I will not go gently into the night."
Tamara's voice was a whisper.
"I will not. Beware."
She raised her head, her eyes meeting Nyarlathotep's. The black of his eyes filled with swirling galaxies and cosmic nebula. Her whispering voice grew into a quiet growl.
"I will not. Tread cautiously."
Her emotions rising, her teeth grinding, telltale wisps of energy sprawled into her. Gentle ripples spread across the dark, still waters. Nyarlathotep's smile was slow to grow, to spread across his unblemished face. His teeth brilliant, perfectly white, handsome, like some televangelist, charismatic in his condescension. When he spoke, it was accompanied with a great sense of anticipation. It was slow, measured, and deliberate. "My child," he virtually purred, "your time has passed. Your world is already fallen." He almost sounded sympathetic. "How much more suffering must you bear?" The man's smile spread further still, pushing its human illusion to its breaking point. "I know of your hope." His eyes seemed to flicker power and glee. "I am aware of your precious Nozomi." Something small and hidden scurried across the edge of their peripheral vision. Tamara's flesh was luminescent, the whirling dynamo of psychic energy uncontainable at this point, leaking out and manifesting in slow levitation. Nozomi found a new hiding place. Nyarlathotep casually glanced at the tiny child. His pearly smile spread inhumanly wider as he returned his gaze upon Tamara. "So brave." His tone was mocking, as still more energy flooded into Tamara. Nyarlathotep straightened his black tie. "You truly are quite a marvel. No fear." Nozomi jumped out into the open. Nyarlathotep made a mocking expression of surprise, her voice tiny, as she called out to her mother.
"You're not alone."
There was no more containing the blistering energy pent up within.
"No fear,"
Tamara bellowed through clenched teeth. She released the gravitonic pulse in every direction, in no direction, in those invisible non-directions. The very fabric of reality tore around the trio, the walls of this universe blistering and erupting. The outer chaos rained in. The ground beneath their feet violently drifted apart like the shattering ice sheet. The legion of ghouls violently thrown and tumbling in the destruction's wake. Nyarlathotep's form fell into a horrific chaos. Abandoned was his human disguise. It roared, its language lost. Things dark and shadowy, reminiscent of tentacles, roping and lashing out. In the blink of an eye, Tamara was galvanized into action, scooping Nozomi up, countless breaches ripping and tearing open around them, the two plunging into the nearest. Other breaches hungrily swallowing unfortunate ghouls in their path. The monster's roar was deafening as Nyarlathotep fell through the dimensional portal in pursuit, massive chunks of blasted land tumbling in its wake, bodies of ghoul raining off. As Tamara fell into the oceanic bulk between the universes, plummeting through the never. Her psychic powers lashed out, violently tearing open other breaches through the descending chaos. These portals to other worlds acting as obstacles, battering the pursuing monster. She held Nozomi tightened to her bosom. Plunging, evading, careening past gateways upon gateways, searching, listening to the call of the last Zaquayan. This was a non-place, a forbidden place. All objects, all debris, all refuse were purged, countless breaches swallowing the shattered lands, drinking up the falling ghouls. There! Tamara heard only a glimmer of the last Zaquayan's call. There! It was faint, but it was enough. The pair fell through one of the millions of breaches. Holding the tiny girl's face tightly to her chest, concealing her eyes, she turned as they entered a new universe. The monstrosity of shadows, corporeal darkness, and tentacles roaring and crackled in the approach, reaching out with the free hand. Tamara simply clenched it into a fist. The breach snapped shut and closed, silencing Nyarlathotep's roaring. For the briefest moment, a scar stood upon the air, then faded to a pristine, unblemished azure sky. The sound of birds filtered in. Slowly, the measure and rhythm of normality replaced the chaos. Tamara stood, putting down her adopted daughter, Nozomi, taking her hand as they surveyed their new world.